He was the queen of the boardroom, sharp heels, sharper tongue, and a net worth that made Wall Street shiver. Everyone bowed, obeyed, or begged, until the day she mocked a janitor during a charity gala, a man sweeping the marble floor, quiet, unassuming, invisible. But when she smirked and said, "If you can play Chopin, I'll marry you," the room laughed. He didn't. He just walked to the piano. And when his fingers touched the keys, her world stopped. What he revealed next didn't just silence the room, it changed her forever. This is not a love story. This is a story about power, ego, and a man who carried music in his soul. The chandelier sparkled like fallen stars in the grand hall of Versailles Manor. Billionaires sipped wine aged older than most of the guests. Women in silk gowns whispered behind manicured fingers. Men in tuxedos paraded like kings. At the center of it all stood Isabelle Charbonneau, CEO of Lyratech, tech goddess, media darling, and heir to an empire. The night was meant to honor donors and support underprivileged art schools. Ironically, none of the attendees had likely ever known real struggle except maybe the staff working behind the curtains. And among them was Elijah, a janitor, black, quiet 30-something, wore an old Navy uniform that barely fit his wide shoulders, moved with quiet grace, always careful not to disturb the important people. Isabelle noticed him only because he was in her frame during a photo. "Move," she said, not unkindly, but without looking at him he did. But it was her friend Lionel, drunk on champagne and pride, who made things worse. "You know, Isabelle, you've conquered tech, space, and even politics. What next? Marry a man who can play Chopin blindfolded." She laughed, flipping her golden hair. "Only if he can play Nocturne in E-flat without missing a single note." Someone joked, "What if Elijah plays it?" The room burst into laughter. She turned to him, amused. "Well, Mr. Janitor, if you can play Chopin, I'll marry you." Her voice was playful, dripping with sarcasm. Elijah looked up, calm, then walked to the grand piano. Silence. He sat down gently. No showmanship, just reverence. The audience expected chaos, maybe a funny attempt, something to laugh about on social media later. But the moment his fingers pressed the ivory keys, time froze. Nocturne in E-flat major, op9 no. 2. The notes weren't just accurate, they breathed, they wept, they floated through the ballroom like whispered dreams, caressing the ears of every guest and slicing through the arrogance that once choked the air. People began turning slowly, eyes wide. Some closed their eyes, others gasped audibly. And Isabelle, she didn't blink. She stood frozen, her wine glass trembling because Elijah wasn't playing. He was storytelling when he finished. There was no applause at first, only stunned silence. Then, thunder. The crowd rose to their feet. Even the violinists hired to play later stood clapping and awed. Elijah nodded once humbly, then stood up and began walking back to his mop. "Wait," Isabelle called, still breathless, her voice shook. "Where did you learn to play like that?" He turned softly. "My mother taught me. She used to clean homes during the day, played Chopin at night to forget." Tears welled in her eyes, unexpected, unwelcome. "You were never just a janitor, were you?" Elijah smiled. "No one is just anything, ma'am." Then he vanished into the crowd. Days later, Isabelle had her assistant find him. What she discovered shook her. Elijah Carter, a Juilliard dropout, former child piano prodigy, and once dubbed America's next Lang Lang, until tragedy struck. His father died in a racially charged accident. With no money, Elijah left Juilliard to care for his mother, working odd jobs. When she passed, he never returned to music, only to mop floors and halls where he once might have performed. Isabelle flew to him, found him in a modest apartment, piano keys covered in dust. "I owe you an apology," she said. He nodded. "You owe yourself a mirror." That line hit her harder than a headline, and from that day, Isabelle Charbonneau changed. Months passed. Isabelle quietly funded a music conservatory, named it after Elijah's mother. He refused fame, but she insisted he teach. Eventually, he agreed, and one night, during a concert attended by thousands, she stood beside him once more, not as a queen mocking a janitor, but as a student honoring a master. "Would you play it again?" she asked, tears in her voice. He sat down. This time she sat beside him, silent, reverent. When the piece ended, she leaned close and whispered, "You don't need to marry me." "I didn't plan to." He smiled. They laughed together. Two strangers, once separated by ego, now united by truth. Elijah never returned to his mop, but he never sought a throne. Either he became the heart of the conservatory, mentoring hundreds of kids from the streets just like he once was. Isabelle resigned from her CEO post a year later, not because she was broken, but because she was healed. She said in her farewell speech, "The world teaches us that success is stepping on others to rise. But one janitor taught me that true greatness is lifting others even when no one's watching." And as for the piano, it still sits in that grand hall. But now, etched in gold on its edge are the words, "If you can play Chopin, play it with your soul."